Welcome back to a page from history. It is 40 years since the UNGA decided to observe 1975 as the International Women's Year as part of efforts to raise awareness on gender issues. Pamela, one very integral part that we look at is a large number of these protests starting from the time of the mid-70s Mathura rape case, is basically to also force the government into improving laws which provided safety and security to women. There was fairly significant in a historical context to the laws of in the 1983 to the amendment to the CRPC Act. You have had several legislations also through the entire period. The horror of sex determination text, which I have referred to, resulted in an act where it was found, PNDT Act, which was found not very effective. The further amendments were made. Now, how do you look at this entire, the cause and effect, if I can actually to say that?
Yeah. If we to look at the sex determination, in the old days it used to be amniocentesis, and it was Maharashtra that actually, it was in Bombay that the first protests against this took place. And why? Because if you traveled in the trains in those days, you would see, open, sort of ads.
Because it was legal at that time.
It was legal. Yes. So the point was, but what...
And these ads were declaring what? That you can come get your sex determined.
And at a very reasonable cost. It's all very simple. But it wasn't that simple, There were problems and so on, because amniocentesis was very intrusive. You had to inject and take the fluid off from the amniocentic sac and so on. So it was quite a fraught procedure. But lots of women came for it because of pressures from within their household.
Well, they were not going on their own. They were possibly being coerced, and also they were also deciding to do it because of social pressure. And it pressure to produce a male child.
Right, and it was a women's movement that really had some of the first demonstrations on this. I remember one where the mothers brought out their daughters on the streets, little girls saying, "We are proud of our daughters," And they tried to raise consciousness, but we know that these are structural changes that were happening in society. As family structures were changing, as people had the choice of family size, they were also building families in a way that made economic sense to them and so on. So we saw that these are very large issues. Now, laws are required definitely. The state needed to step in because there were so many interests riding on this. You had a huge medical industry growing up, wealthier on this. So the state had to step in and regulate.
Several northern states came to be called as virtual capitals of sex determination industry.
Absolutely. I mean, the tagline was that if you spend 50 rupees now, you will save
a lot of money
5,000 in dowry later. Those kind of taglines. No, in those days, 5,000 was a huge amount.
Vitambara Shastri, a UNI journalist, came back from Amritsar and did a story saying that this is how sex determination tests were being publicized.
That is how Punjab actually came
and
to be known as
that is when in July 82, I remember, in Delhi we had a meeting with CWDS and ADWA, and a lot of other women's organizations joined in. We also had doctors present, medical doctors, who said, and they expressed a clear concern that the women's movement should not be seen to be anti-technology, but it should definitely protest at the use of technology in this manner to advance selective abortions, etc. So there was that was in fact one of the starting points of this debate around technology that I remember in my own work.
But looking at laws, what were we asking for? We were asking for legal protections, because these were issues that went far beyond the individual person or woman. And so one of the first, the rape law. Why was the rape law one of the first? In 1983, they introduced changes in the rape law responding to women, and that was because this whole nature of consent which came up in the
Was it
Mathura
this?
rape
Yes.
case, it
So
came up again.
that was fundamentally changed in 83.
That's right.
Right.
And the onus of proof was
Right.
shifted from the woman who was
Right.
raped to the rapist.
In custodial.
Yeah,
Yes.
in custodial, in situations of custodial rape, yes.
Right. Namita, we're talking about these sex determination tests. Now it is fairly routine to walk into any any diagnostic clinic where they do ultrasound tests and other things. You have these routine tests, saying that we do not do sex determination. Now let's talk in terms of the effectivity. Now it is okay, it is understood that technology has made things available everywhere. It's fine, there is a certain amount of checks and balances in big cities, even in slightly smaller cities. But what do you do with the mushrooming of such diagnostic centers? To what extent, as a journalist, what kind of feedback you are hands-on working on gender stories for a very important newspaper?
Well,
what kind of report do you get from the field?
Nilanjan, it's very surprising that every clinic has this great big announcement that sex determination tests are prohibited by law, and yet we have the worst ever sex ratio in the 0 to 6.
It's keeping on declining.
0 to 6 age group is the worst in 6 decades.
Yes.
So, this is a red flag issue, and I mean, the obvious question is how many prosecutions have there been? It's been 40 years since the PNDT Act. How many doctors are in jail, or technicians are in jail, or have been prosecuted, or even have been charge sheeted? I don't have that figure. I would be very surprised if it's more than a handful. So, the fact is that this is not a red flag issue, and that is the tragedy. The fact is that, Parliament should be debating, what do we do? It's not enough to launch a Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao movement from Haryana, which of course today has the worst sex ratio in the country, and is now forced to traffic women from other states because there are no women left to marry. They've killed off all their girls.
Right.
Or not all their girls, but a significant number of girls. So we bring in laws, dowry, to take another law. I mean, and in fact, it is one of the tragedies of India that almost every law concerning the protection of women, as Pamela puts it, has literally been brought in over the blood and bodies of women. You wait for dowry, you look at rape, you look at even the latest 2013. How long did Parliament sit on that amendment, and why did it have to take this heinous gang rape and murder for Parliament to finally get down together and appoint a commission and pass a law such as it is? I mean, they did not give in to everything that the women's groups were asking. So when it comes to women, you literally wait for the bodies to start piling up before you suddenly wake up and say, okay, let's act, let's do something. The fact of the matter is also that but you do need that law, you do need that legal framework. Does that solve our problems? Today we are talking about crimes against women being at a high 69% decadal increase over the last 10 years in all crimes against women. So is it just that it's more reporting, or is it that crimes against women are going up, or is it that the laws alone are not enough? You bring in a law, dowry certainly is illegal, but continues.
Continues, definitely.
Yeah, and we know it continues.
Probably, Indu, do you think that dowry continues is probably because we do not have property rights? So there is generally a belief that a girl in any case does not get the property once it goes to the son on the family. So might as well give it to the girl at the time of wedding, give her share. It may be just to be minuscule of what the property is.
Well, I don't know if it's a share at all. Really.
No, that is the argument.
And well, that's one of the defense or justifications that has been advanced for dowry, but the movement has really never accepted that understanding. We have clearly seen, you're right, that yes, it is true that women do not get a share in property, but it is not just property. There are enough studies today we have of across the board how different laws have a bias against women, and definitely the lack of inheritance rights, despite HSA 2005, the amendment in the Hindu Succession Act.
Right.
The fact that agricultural property is still not given to women,
right,
and there are state laws which still debar it. So even though at the national level the possibility exists, but if the state limitations are not removed at the state level for agricultural property, that bar still remains. So those kind of issues are there. But I think there's more to it than just the law and the discrimination in inheritance and property rights, because that affects a certain section of population.
Right.
But I think there is a bias, there is a gender discrimination bias which has spread which was not existing amongst communities. For instance, when we talk of dowry, we all know that earlier Muslims did not have the practice of
It's the
dowry.
influence of other communities on them.
Or upper caste communities had a history of dowry, but other castes did not. Similarly, female infanticide was not across all castes and communities. So what we find, what is challenging and what is really what needs more study and specific addressal is that since the 80s, along with the marketization, you know, the commercialization of sort of social relations at a more general level, the anti-women bias has spread to groups which did not necessarily hold those as customs in their earlier histories. So those communities which did not have those practices have adopted anti-women practices, but none of the for instance, none of the progressive aspects of the share of the woman in other communities is accepted. So there's a universalization of the anti-woman bias, but the laws are certainly not being implemented. That's true. But I think we really need to see how it is happening in terms of marketization of relations.
Pamela, do you think, to what extent do you think liberalization has been a factor in making things more difficult for women, to put it very directly?
Actually, that what we see then is the consumer
stereotyping,
taking over
the
consumer taking over the citizen in many ways. When you look at media, for instance, look at how television changed in the 90s after liberalization. It was a sea change, and media not only does it reflect liberalization, it creates the conditions for further, because it creates certain consumption patterns, lifestyles, and so on. So when you see those soaps, those well-mounted soaps of the 90s,
cinema, for instance.
You
this
see
entire story of the drive for size zero, it's such a marketed concept.
So here you are actually pitted against global flows of capital in many ways, and how it changes the market and how it changes the person who is consuming or made to consume these things, or the desire to consume becomes so overwhelming. That, I mean, and when you talk of the aspirational middle class, you're also talking about a certain market model.
Exactly.
And that reflects at every level of society, I think.
I'll take a break at this point and then come back and resume the final segment in this program. Rape is undoubtedly the most violent form of sexual violence. For decades, survivors lived in shame. The brutal incident in Delhi in December 2012, also known as the Nirbhaya episode, catalyzed the process of coming out. There is growing consciousness that rape survivors should not carry the trauma of shame. It must be borne by the perpetrators. Don't go away, we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to a page from history. It is 40 years since the UN declared 1975 as the International Women's Year. The nature of discourse on gender issues has evolved in this period. Namita, December 2012, out of the blue you have a very violent incident which really stirs the imagination and makes people respond, come out. Just the sheer horror of the nature of the incident gave rise to fresh laws, to redefining, widening the entire definition of rape. If you go back and look at it, it's almost 2.5 years since that entire debate has continued. Now, how do you look at the progress of the debate so far?
We do have a tougher law, and of course the law did not subscribe to what the women's groups were asking for. It fell short of making marital rape illegal. It fell short of bringing the armed forces into, especially where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is in force, bringing them within the purview
within the ambit of this law.
Absolutely, criminal prosecution. It imposed capital punishment, which none of the women's groups were not asking. Be that as it may, there is a new law. It has widened the definition of rape, which is to be welcomed. I'm not sure where they stand on male victims, for instance. I think it's only at a certain age, less than 18. And I think it is unfair because, I don't think any feminist is talking about women's rights alone.
That only women
talking
can be
about
victims
gender
of sexual
rights.
violence. Anyone can be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we do recognize that. Having said that, governments can bring in laws. That is what they are supposed to do. But governments cannot tell us how to bring up our sons and daughters.
Right.
And I think that is where we are failing, because 2.5 years later, you look at the incident in Rohtak, which took place in January this year, which was even more horrific, if such a thing is possible, than what happened in December 2012.
Right.
And yet there was hardly any media outrage. There was almost no public outrage. I mean,
Why would you say that was the case, being a media practitioner?
Well, I think partly it's also because we're so obsessed with New Delhi and Bombay, so that Shakti Mills will make it to the front page, and Nirbhaya will make it to a front page, and Uber cab, but Rohtak, it's 80 kilometers from Delhi. My God, that's so far. It's another planet. So we don't.
80 kilometers a distance from one end of Delhi to other.
But it's true. It is true. I mean, it's you look at the gang rape of Dalit girls. The selective targeting of Dalit girls by upper caste men in Haryana. We almost don't cover it. It's almost like it doesn't happen.
So there are very few Dalits in the media. Is that the reason?
I don't know. As I said, we tend to be Delhi centric. We tend to also be very market driven, as Pamela was saying. So our market.
Which story would sell?
Absolutely, and our market, our consumers, in a sense, our news consumers, are middle class urbanites.
So it must touch their chord. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Nirbhaya, to be fair, did touch, regardless of any kind of media prompting. I mean, the media, I think,
because the girl could have been from any other family who watched television every evening.
Absolutely.
So which does not possibly be the case in the case of Rohtak.
Completely.
So what we are talking about, Pamela, we are talking that there has to be some kind of a change, much more basic and fundamental than just changing laws, just about increasing greater, ensuring better implementation. That laws are more effective. We got to also possibly look at the family unit. When we were young, society, it was very common that normally the best portion at the dinner table would be given to the son, the male child in the family. Still continues in a large number of families.
It does. And in a sense, the family is the unit of society, basic unit of society. So what happens within the family colors society in many, many ways. This incident, the Delhi gang rape, was very striking because it was one incident where people felt driven to come out on the streets. It wasn't at the call of a political party or a political leader that they came out.
They felt spontaneous.
Yeah,
some
spontaneous, but then, but behind
reporting.
that was also a lot of mediatization. We must also understand that we are now living in an age where the media is speaking.
If it was not being covered 24/7, people would not probably have gone out.
And also, I think social media and the ability to
communicate with
many to many communications are very important. It changed the nature of the discourse, and people actually felt that they were drawn to it. When television, for instance, takes on the social media format, which is what happened, it became a blogosphere, an entire thing. They let their cameras run and got people to talk extempo into the cameras. So people felt they had the voice, and you saw a lot of creativity as well. But I feel that even while we understand this moment and try and analyze it, we should also know that there are very dark shades to this mobilization. The cry for capital punishment, for instance,
it's very strong
reflected a very strong patriarchal dominance over the discourse. It was telling people that yes, women should not step out. Our women have to be protected. So you had these very, very differing kind of discourses emerge from the same incident. And I think
this entire argument, that women tend to, those who get raped, they invite by provocating.
That's right.
Provocative dressing.
Right.
That has been a common
argument.
So
we saw how much that was articulated as well by very influential people in society. So when we understand that whole moment, then we understand that here are people who look on this girl as their daughter or as their sister. That's because within the family there's also a strong protective impulse.
And also, demanding for capital punishment is virtually that you remove one person, so-called scum of the world, everything is going to be normal.
All right,
but the point is that the problem happens not because of one individual, but because that person is also the part of a certain process.
Right.
Which is what's probably ignored.
And we're not even talking about 90% of the rapes that take place within, people known
within
to
families,
the women and within families.
Known families.
We're not even talking about it.
Yes.
Indu, there is a question which comes to my mind, that for somebody who has been part of the women's movement for such a long period, one level is, you have this entire campaign for more laws, for greater stringent approach, that the government must do its job properly, political parties must be much more sensitive to demands of, be more gender sensitive, there must be gender budgeting, for all these debates are there. The other is at the society level to increase awareness, what we are talking about, that you have to ensure that when you sit on the dinner table, the male child does not get the chicken leg piece, to put it very symbolically, but gets, everyone, the daughter is also entitled to it, as and when she so desires. How do you strike a balance between these two things?
Well, I think the movement has been trying to do that right through, because for every law that we did get passed, there were huge campaigns across cities. I can speak for Delhi because I was always located here. On the rape law, there was a huge campaign. On the anti-dowry legislation, how many years we campaigned to sensitize, even to get the category of dowry deaths registered in the psyche of the public and the media, and then the National Crime Records Bureau. Or for instance, now what we have seen as the recognition of honor, so-called honor killings
have become a huge...
how it starts with activists in Haryana noticing that their students are suddenly missing from class, and they go and investigate and ask the families, where are the girls, why aren't they coming to school or to class or whatever. So I think the movement, and on each one of these issues there were public campaigns, door-to-door campaigns, street corner meetings. I mean, I think in the anti-dowry campaign we were holding something like 30-40 street corner meetings every day at mill gates, which existed in those days, which are no more there, or in bastis and so many marketplaces. I mean, places like Karol Bagh, Lajpat Nagar, where dowry is actually bought and sold every day. So it has not been just the law, but that's part of public awareness. It's also claiming a space in terms of citizenship, rights for women, etc. I think that has been there. The focus on the family has been there, but we must realize that the family is itself changing. We often tend to see family disputes only in terms of gender, and that's the most common argument against the women's movement. But the fact is that the unit is changing, both in terms of, we often see rifts at the highest level in terms of property. But it is equally true that poverty also puts pressures of a different kind on the family and rips it apart. It sends the child in work to some place, the male goes out in some place for work. So the family is, in a sense, itself being fragmented because of the economic processes. The women very often, but since now even men find it difficult to get jobs, women find it difficult to get jobs, but women having to bear the brunt of running the kitchen going are out in search of whatever kind of work they may get. So the uncertainty of everyday life, the vulnerability, so the insecurity is built into that. One of the Dalit minor girls who got raped in Haryana, her mother was a garbage picker. She would leave the house at 2 in the morning because if she left later, she would not find anything in the scrap that she was collecting. So, I mean, if the nature of the working class is changing, the nature of the working class family is also changing, and the pressures on those families as our society gets more unequal, more deeply divided. There may be an affluent section of the middle class, but the pressure on the lower sections of economic, with rising costs of living, food inflation, has been so bizarre that, I mean, all I can say is that we're only still touching the tip of the iceberg as far as understanding what is happening to the family and what it means in terms of the crime rates that we see, etc. It is not about westernization or losing track of our parampara and sanskar, as some people would like to believe. It is these macro processes which are leading to such brutal lives at the lowest levels of society, and corporate crimes, which of course are going, you know, totally.
I think Indu has really brilliantly summed up this discussion. Pamela, one last word from you, that if there is one thing which you want to focus on immediately, what would that be?
I would say that I think rights. Basically, we should go back to the language of rights, and bodily integrity is a very important right that has to be defended. But I also want to say that we started off with that international decade, you know, of women, and we saw from this discussion how it was so important to have your own discourse, and how women from the south defined it vis-a-vis women from the west.
I think that's very well put. Thank you very much for coming me and coming and joining me on this program. It's really been wonderful to have the three of you here. International Women's Day is observed every year. Often ritualistic pledges are made, but the battle has to be fought not just in the public domain, but as we are talking about, also in the personal arena. If we want India to be safer for women, a country where they can chase their dreams and pursue ideas, the mindset has to change at the family level. Sweets must be distributed at the birth of a girl child, and parents must not look at daughters as a burden. No profession should be considered beyond them. Do not wait for others to take the lead. Become leaders yourself. Do write to us at historylistv@gmail.com. We will return next week. There will be another page from history and another panel of experts. Till then, goodbye.